Good morning. This is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to the Sunday Forum on this Sunday, February the 28th. And once again, we are having a guest speaker in as part of our Faith, Vocation, and Economics series here at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. And our speaker today is Tracy Mathews, who is the Executive Director of the Call to Work. Her offices are in Chicago. Now, before we go over into the interview, I want to introduce her, share some of her bio. Tracy Mathews and the Call to Work have developed a workshop-based experience teaching participants models and tools by which to integrate their faith into their daily work and life situations. The course catalyzes spiritual growth and transformation as participants leverage the truth of Scripture to help them respond well to the current challenges that keep them up at night. Prior to the Call to Work, Tracy Mathews spent 8 years leading strategy and business development for an early-stage industrial biotech company. She has also held positions at McKinsey & Company and Kimberly-Clark Corporation. She holds a BS in Paper Science and Engineering from the University of Washington and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Tracy has been leading the development of the Call to Work since March of 2016 and says of her experience, and this is a quote, "Through the tools and principles I'm learning through the Call to Work, I'm experiencing more of God's presence and more fullness of life than I ever thought possible in this life." And so with that, let's go over to the interview again with Tracy Mathews. Good morning. This is Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to our Sunday Forum on this Sunday, February the 28th, the last day of February. We're really glad that you could join us in this series on faith, vocation, and economics. And we want to talk about the spirituality of work today, how you connect your faith with your daily work. And for that, we've brought in an expert, someone who's helped me a lot, Tracy Mathews from Chicago. She has a program that helps us to connect faith and work, and we want her to talk to us and guide us in that program today and, of course, tomorrow. And again, we hope that you like what you hear today on the Sunday Forum, and she will join us live for a Zoom conversation on Monday, March the 1st at 10 a.m., where she goes more deeply into this connection between faith and work and how that spirituality can really blossom in all of our lives. But before we go into more of that detail, Tracy, I want to welcome you to the Sunday Forum here at Emmanuel. We've worked together for a couple years, but we'd like to start by having you introduce yourself to us here at Emmanuel.
Sure, I'd love to. First of all, let me thank you, Pastor Rick, for bringing me on here. It's so good to be with you guys. I've so enjoyed working with you, Rick, and many of the others, and I just look forward to exploring what God has for us next. But in terms of a little bit about me, I'm born and raised in Seattle. My parents are from Hong Kong, both entrepreneurs by trade. I have two sisters. I now live outside of Chicago with my husband, Jeff, of 18 years. We've got two boys, 9 and 11. And my background's in engineering and business, but I have been at the reins of the Call to Work for about 5 years now.
So are you an entrepreneur like your parents? Would you describe yourself that way?
I would describe myself that way.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Both by upbringing, but also just by innate design. I believe that as well, too.
So as you started your work life, or maybe it was even before in college, how and when did you start making this important connection between your faith and your work? I mean, what happened?
Yes. Well, let me tell you a little bit about my faith journey, just so you have that context, and then the work journey. So my family started going to church when I was in junior high. And I learned a lot about God. I would say I truly came to my own belief in God in college, and experienced a good, solid faith journey through my church family, through others. And then I got connected with who's now my spiritual director, in about 2007. And that opened up just whole new dimensions to my relationship with God and what it meant to experience God directly and relationally. So very vibrant faith journey throughout, but really starting in probably 2007, 2008, when I started meeting with my spiritual director. And from a work standpoint, an entrepreneur by nature before the call to work, and why we moved to Chicago was for me to join a biotech startup, which was doing just awesome work. Big believer in the private sector, very passionate about work and typically work oriented growing up and actually still now. And the collision of the two happened, well, in a variety of ways, but I'll point out one significant moment. And a few months prior to this more significant moment, I had a conversation with a friend who was describing impact investing. It was something that was brand new to me at the time, but just this simple idea of financial investors wanting more than a financial return from their investment. They want like a social or environmental good, this triple bottom line kind of idea. And that just got the wheels turning. And a few months later, kind of in an epiphany moment, I was walking up the back stairwells of church. It's basically unrelated to the Sunday service, but I had this epiphany, this thought of like, what if business is for more than just making money? And it was a brand new thought. Were you going to say something? Go ahead.
No, I could just see you having that epiphany. That's a great story.
Yes. And actually the way I took it was like, oh, here I am. I would have told you and meant it. I'm like all about Jesus. And I'm also passionate about my work. And it just floored me at that moment that, a place where I spend the vast majority of my waking hours, like I've never even asked God the fundamental purpose of it. So it was interesting that you used the word collision, right? Yes. It wasn't like they dated for a while and then you got the two married, work and your faith life. It really was a collision, wasn't it? It was, and I had some basics of what it meant to operate with integrity, and to tell people about Jesus and these parts that I think many are awake to in terms of being a Christian in the workplace. But this idea that God cares about the purpose of business, and I've now come to believe has purpose and guidance for like every situation I face. It was a moment of like awakening. It was a collision and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was largely from I tend to be a little bit performance driven. God is healing me from this, but it was this like, oh no, I so failed in my faith. So you then at some point decided to take this insight and actually build a program or build a method of spiritual formation, this called to work. Tell us about that story and what you're trying to achieve with it. Oh yeah, I mean, from a story perspective, it would take us hours to do it justice. Okay. But I would say that it's through spiritual attunement, this guidance from God kind of all along the way that led me to take on what is now the call to work and actually continues to guide every step of the way. And that's really at the core of what the call to work is all about. We teach spiritual attunement, this simple and beautiful idea of hearing from God and responding to it. Hearing God's guidance for every situation we face, and using that guidance as our main objective and our goal, bringing our full creative capacity to the table to follow the guidance God has given us. Now let me ask you about that word, attunement, because we're used to hearing atonement, right, in church, and you're using attunement. So explain that word, and then how do you connect that again with work? Yes. Well, we used to use the word discernment, right? This idea of hearing or understanding God's guidance to help us discern the path forward. But what we found were there many times where people hear God's guidance or get a sense of it, but then snap right back into what they were planning to do beforehand. Right. And so we started using this word attunement to get at the idea of it's not only hearing God's guidance, but responding to it or aligning myself. Kind of when you think of like a band or an orchestra warming up, they all tune to each other, whereas you hear the master note and then you adjust your response, your instrument, so that you're in line with it. And the idea with attunement is that we're hearing God's guidance as the master note in whatever it is we're doing. And we're actually adjusting our response so that we are in resonance.
Now, I have to ask you this, Tracy, because we did 100 interviews here at Emmanuel 2 years ago on how people connected faith and work. And some didn't have even an idea of what that meant, but others had learned how to do that, but they had not learned how to do that at church. They learned it from mentors, maybe from their parents, somewhere else. In fact, one person said it quite sharply, I should say, when it comes to connecting faith and work, that's not what I would expect my pastor to help me with, right? Because that's just not, my pastor doesn't understand my workplace, right? So tell us about, again, how your program helps people do something that they might not learn how to do at church.
Yes. Well, what we do is we offer people and teams guided experiences or tools, exercises, we call them spiritual practices, aimed at our daily hour by hour work. So we usually will begin with a specific situation or a work effort that we have, and then we walk people through some guided exercises that help them open themselves up to God's guidance, to kind of see the deeper patterns at play, and then to the best of their abilities, discern the key themes or what we call growth edges God has for them, the guideposts God has for their response. And then we help create the space for them to align their response, like what they will actually do, to line up with the guidance they've given from God. And we see it as something that is something you learn via practice. We'll use the analogy of what it looks like to learn a new instrument, or a new language, a new sport. It's something that you got to get out there and practice. And our practice opportunities happen in the daily stuff of work and life. So it does take kind of creating the space for people to really process through like the stuff of life they're going through.
Now, as Tracy, as you and I discussed our interview today, one of the things you suggested was that we would actually do some of those spiritual practices on Monday, tomorrow, at 10 a.m. And I just want to underline the point you just made. Sometimes you actually have to do the spiritual practices rather than just try to theorize about what might be possible. So that's for tomorrow, okay? So we hope that you'll come and join us as Tracy walks us through some of those spiritual practices. But I wanted to say do you find that this type of spiritual practice is for everyone? I mean, or who is drawn, what groups are drawn, what individuals are drawn to making these connections between faith and work and practicing these very special spiritual practices?
Yeah, I mean, we could cut that pie in a lot of different ways, but I would say that a helpful way to think about who we tend to see drawn towards this, I put into two camps. And actually, both are looking for something more. They're growth oriented in some way. I would say the first camp are coming to this, are investing in this because they are growth oriented. They're after discipleship, spiritual formation, leadership development, personal growth. We'll talk about this idea of attunement as the essence of a Christ-like response, hearing and obeying, not my will, but yours. So people who are looking at Christian maturity and maturing will often be drawn to this. But the second camp, I would say it's more so that they're in a hard place and they want God's help.
Oh, right.
And both are beautiful, and God wants both, right? And one serves the other. It's really, gaining more of God's help and following his guidance in the actual stuff we want help with that helps us practice the maturity that we seek. And the maturity we seek will help us do that even more so in the next situation, and the next situation, and the next situation.
So you've been doing this for how long now? How long have you had this initiative that you've been leading?
Yes, I've been at the reins of the call to work for about 5 years now. Now, I guess there's been kind of development of the practices all along the way, but it's been about 5 years that I've been on this journey.
Okay, so as you've done this, and I know you've changed and adapted as you've learned by working with groups, but what's some of the fruit that you're noticing emerging from those who really participate in this call to work?
Oh yeah, I mean it's so varied. People are bringing their everyday situations, big and small, the new initiatives, and God has help for all of it. Like that's kind of the fundamental premise is every situation. But, we see things in the hour by hour, big and little stuff of life, where people are responding to specific situations with more, goodness and wisdom and purpose. So things like, I'm going to treat this vendor as a whole person, or I'm going to have that tough conversation with my boss or my daughter. I'm going to, reach out to that estranged loved one that we haven't spoken in 10 years, or some of the bigger stuff. We're going to do this new initiative, even though it totally freaks me out. I'm going to finally quit this job or lay this thing down, which I know God has wanted me to for a long time. There are these specific, immediate, situational steps of goodness that people take, which is fruit in of itself. But I would say that what I get most jazzed up about is this longer term spiritual maturing, where we see people grow in their courage and agency, people awakening from, I'm just somebody who sits in the pew and, gives my tithe. And that's great, that's good. But awakening to, wow, God has given me a role to play in the kingdom.
Yeah. Now,
that kind of stuff is what jazzes me up most.
I'm sure some of our people, as they're watching this, they're wondering, do I practice these spiritual exercises by myself, or am I doing this within a group? I mean, how do you shape and form these attunement exercises?
We actually, and both are right. So we say, hey, practices are to be done on your own. The goal is a moment by moment discernment process, but there's such an invaluable role that community plays, so that we are going through this journey together, and we're learning from one another, and we're learning this we call a posture of attunement and how it plays out. And so the idea of doing this in community, both from like an individual discernment, but we're doing it together and we're learning these things together. But also there are times where group discernment, where together we are making these decisions, are really important and so additive to discerning the path forward.
One of the things we're excited about here at Emmanuel, Tracy, is that you're working with a group of, as it so happens, of women leaders out at the park, using this model called to work of spiritual attunement to build some leaders out at the park who can be of assistance to Will and Dee, and we really thank you for that.
And one note on that really quick. I'm so excited both for the individual leadership development, but also for the desire and the real potential for helping spiritual attunement become part of the culture itself.
Right.
Out at the park. And we think that is that much more powerful as those kind of reinforcing mechanisms allow this to grow, kind of get into the drinking water of how that community runs.
Great. Now we're going to invite again everyone to join us tomorrow on Monday, March the 1st, where we're going to then engage with Tracy, and she's going to walk us through some of these exercises, and we're going to do it together and in small groups. We can do that with technology, which is just wonderful. But before we close, Tracy, any final words, something that maybe we just didn't touch on that you think is so important about Call to Work?
I would broaden it to spiritual attunement, which can happen through the call to work, but there are many other pathways to grow it. We think of it as a series of like muscles that you learn and practice over time. But I would say that hopefully this is something that piques your attention. Like I can't express the degree to which this is worth investing in.
Right.
You know, it's made, I can speak personally that it's brought fullness of life to not only me personally, but my family and my work and my neighbors. You know, I sleep better at night. I'm nicer to my kids. Like
There you go.
You know, this kind of connection with God brings so much more fruit than we can possibly imagine. And then the way to invest in it is just practice. You know, find those practices that work for you. Let God guide you in whatever it is that you're facing today or tomorrow or the next day that you know could use more of God's help.
So again, Tracy, we want to thank you for this program. Just in general, it's a real assistance and aid to the church, but also that you're helping us here at Emmanuel with our own discipleship, because we lift up these themes of faith, vocation, and economics. And we're glad that you could join us for the Sunday Forum. We're glad that you could join us also for the Sunday Forum. We pray God's blessings as you also experience your faith at work, spiritual attunement. Thanks for joining us again. Bye-bye now.